So let's go back to the beginning of the Georgia RICO charges against Trump, because I think this one had the biggest fanfare of like, oh, it's 18 people, it's massive, it's huge, this is the one that's going to get him, all the rest. So take us back to the beginning. What were the initial charges of this case?
Yeah, so the Georgia prosecution, Mike, this is the one that last year when it dropped, and if memory serves, it was the fourth of all four of the prosecutions to drop. I think that the charges were finally released last August after almost 2 years of Fani Willis doing this investigation, and she launched this thing way back in November of 2021. Back when this dropped, this was the one that struck many of us as potentially being the one that could actually really trip up Donald Trump. And that was the case for numerous reasons. One is the fact that this is involving state law, not federal law. So even if Trump were to win the presidency, he would not be able to pardon himself. The president can only pardon himself hypothetically. It's never happened before, but you hypothetically can only pardon yourself for federal crimes, not state crimes. Furthermore, you're dealing with a very blue jurisdiction in Fulton County, Georgia. That's where the city of Atlanta is. That's a roughly 80-20, I think maybe even technically 83-17 Joe Biden over Donald Trump voting county. So a very, very
depends
liberal.
How many water mains are working or not. But yeah, sure, totally 80-20. I'll go with you.
Yeah, something along those lines, right? You also have a very, very wide-ranging RICO statute. So that's the actual statute that Fani Willis and the prosecutors there whipped out to indict Donald Trump and his roughly 18 or so co-defendants in this case. They did so under Georgia's mini RICO statute, and it's modeled on the federal congressional RICO statute. And Mike, just to make sure we're all on the same page here, RICO at the federal level, at a U.S. Congress level, developed decades ago in the 20th century as a congressional response to the rise of La Cosa Nostra, to the rise of organized crime and the old school Sicilian mafia in America. That is literally the implicit analogy that Georgia prosecutors are making here, and it's an absolutely absurd and outright offensive analogy that should sit deeply uncomfortably with most Americans. The idea that you have a local prosecutor charging a former president with essentially being the equivalent of a Don Corleone mob boss orchestrating a grand conspiracy to overturn an election in this case in the state of Georgia. But again, the fact that the RICO statute in Georgia is written in such broad language, many of us were concerned that this could allow Fani Willis and her team to really kind of run the gamut, so to speak, when it comes to Donald Trump. Now, the other problem, of course, is in Georgia. You have a Republican governor, Brian Kemp, and a Secretary of State, Brad Raffensperger, who have had their issues with Donald Trump. So many of us are worried that they could potentially be called as hostile witnesses in this case. So it really had the makings of something, Mike, the point I'm making, it had the makings of something that really could trip up Donald Trump. But for the past 2 months now, we've been embroiled in this Hollywood-esque soap opera saga of Fani Willis and Nathan Wade. And it's really distracted, I think, a lot of the momentum that Fani Willis and her prosecutors were working up towards building. And then we had the ruling finally on Friday as to whether or not she would be disqualified. And it's a peculiar ruling. It's a peculiar decision from Judge Scott McAfee. Based on how Fani Willis conducted herself at that evidentiary hearing a few weeks ago that we all saw, when she frankly just looked like an unhinged and, if we're just being very blunt, like somewhat of a stupid person. I mean, she just didn't comport herself with any kind of any kind of public decency. She seemed very frantic. She was yelling. She was asking, like, what continent is the country of Belize in? I mean, she just didn't come across as a particularly competent person who was entrusted with the public law enforcement prosecutorial function. And I thought that McAfee, the judge there, was leaning towards a disqualification. But in the ruling on Friday, he uses very harsh language. He says that there is a, quote, odor of mendacity, an odor of lying and untruthfulness that lingers over this whole case when it comes to her affair with the special prosecutor that she hired, Nathan Wade. And he then says that there is an appearance of corruption, an appearance of impropriety here. But he fails then to do the natural thing that I think he should have done upon making that finding and just disqualify her. Instead, he required that one of the two of them step aside, and Nathan Wade was the one who resigned Friday afternoon. Now, Trump's going to have his shot on appeal here. He's going to be able to appeal this to the appellate court, to Scott McAfee's Superior Court, the Georgia Court of Appeals at the state level there. They're probably going to be able to rule as to whether the remedy here was improper, which is fancy legalese for saying there's still a shot that Fani Willis gets disqualified here. At a bare minimum, at the end of the day, this thing just gets delayed and delayed, and it's continually delayed more and more. So from a strict timeline perspective, I think that Trump is still looking pretty good there in Georgia right now, actually.
Okay. All right. Let's one more point on the conclusion of it. Also, if nothing else, this is all that anyone's talking about with it. And no one's talking about the merits of their case, whatever merits there happen to have been even in the beginning, right?
Yeah, I mean, this really has become the Georgia case. I mean, when people talk about the Georgia case right now, you're thinking about Fani Willis and Nathan Wade. I mean, look, Mike, I'm a lawyer. I mean, I watch this stuff a lot. That hearing we saw a few weeks ago was nuts. I mean, Fani Willis, I couldn't take my eyes off my television watching the way that she was behaving herself. She apparently ran to that courtroom in a haste because she was so eager. She was so huffing and puffing to get up there to try to defend her reputation. But honestly, whoever told her to get up there on the witness stand, I think made a mistake, because she did not do herself any favor. And the other silver line that comes out of this for Trump, Mike, is that even if Fani Willis stays on this case, and even if they somehow are able to expedite a trial and get a verdict in before November, which I don't think they will, but even if they will do that at this point, I think Fani has conducted herself in such shameful and disgraceful fashion that a jury pool, even in far left Fulton County, Georgia, is going to be pretty far-fetched to issue a unanimous criminal conviction at this point, given the way Fani has acted.
Let's go back half a step. Just want to make sure we're on the same page in case we need to articulate this to someone who's not paying attention like we are. So you have Fani Willis, who's the DA of Fulton County, Georgia. She's the one bringing the charges.
Yep.
She hired Nathan Wade as a special prosecutor. Is that right?
Correct.
And
so
they had relations together.
Correct. So because this involves a special type of prosecution, again, it's Georgia's RICO statute. This is not a typical prosecution, right? It's not like every day a county DA office is going to indict a former president of the United States on a statute that resembles something that you'd use to go against the Gambino crime family. So this is not a typical prosecution by any stretch of the imagination. And, you know, Fani Willis, with all due respect, doesn't really kind of come across as a top tier Supreme Court advocate level attorney. So she basically needs to hire a specialist. I mean, that's essentially what this boils down to. And it turns out that the man that she hired to be a specialist, to be the actual lawyer with knowledge of bringing RICO cases, was someone who she had been in an affair with. And then the question was, what was the timeline of this affair? Did the affair commence before or after she formally hired him as part of this investigation? And then that's been a lot of the back and forth for the past 2 months, is where they sleeping together before she hired him, after. But the details of the timeline, to me, Mike, were always a little bit of a distraction. The point is that there is a clear appearance of corruption and impropriety here. And again, Judge Scott McAfee used very withering language in his decision on Friday. He just didn't ultimately pull the trigger the way many of us thought he should.
Okay, sorry, I got to pull up this Instagram video from Trump about this. This is Nathan Wade.
Willis, ever.
Oh, let me go back. Pull it up. Here we go. Oh, you got it.
Miss Willis.
Oh, darn it. Instagram's annoying because it starts to play, but then you got to press the volume button so it doesn't pop up right away. It's very annoying. Here it is.
You go to a cabin with Miss Willis, ever.
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 Okay, and he's doing a thought bubble of Fani Willis scantily clad. He's contemplating. But what a bizarre question. Did you ever go to a cabin ever with Fani Willis? And he says, ever? Did I ever? So how did they get on a stand? Why would they even put on a stand at all? Like, what was the accusations against them was stand worthy? Do you know what I mean?
Right. So what happened was in mid-January, as this thing was going through the suite of pre-trial motions, because these things take time. Like, in criminal prosecutions take a lot of time. There's always a ton of pretrial motions, and the defense needs discovery. So as part of the routine suite of pretrial motions that any criminal prosecution has, one of Trump's many co-defendants in this case, and he has a bunch of co-defendants in the Georgia case. He has John Eastman, he has Jeffrey Clark, he has Mark Meadows, his former chief of staff, Jenna Ellis, my friend and fellow commentator. And one of the co-defendants is a Republican operative by the name of Michael Roman, who somehow found himself involved in the Georgia election in XYZ capacity, and Fani Willis decided to indict him. And it was Michael Roman's lawyers who filed this motion in mid-January, where I guess they did the work that no one else had done so far, where they kind of just hired an investigator, or they searched deep in the bowels of their Google archive, and they somehow managed to piece together that Fani Willis and Nathan Wade had been romantically involved. And they filed the formal motion to disqualify Fani Willis and Nathan Wade because of this affair and because of their corruption. And upon looking at the initial evidence of it, Judge McAfee said, you know what, like, there's actually something here. We're going to have a hearing to kind of tease this all out. And that's how we got to that.
Interesting. Wow. So it wasn't even Trump's lawyers who unearthed this and got the ball moving forward in this. Yeah,
it was Michael Roman. And, a lot of them are sharing lawyers, but it was actually Michael Roman's lawyers in this case.
Wow. Very good. Okay. My last question for you. What about the other 18 people? Have they done anything yet? Have they pled guilty or anything, or are they just waiting, just like Trump is?
So, it's a mixed bag. So Jenna Ellis has taken a plea deal. She took a plea deal a few months ago, so she's essentially off the hook for all intents and purposes, not going to end up serving any jail time or anything like that, not going to have to face trial. Mark Meadows has tried multiple times thus far, both times unsuccessfully, to move his particular prosecution from state court to federal court. The argument there is that his actions as pertains to Kemp and Roethlisberger and the 2020 election in Georgia, the argument there is that Mark Meadows was acting in his official capacity as White House chief of staff, and that when you're acting as a federal official, you must be tried in federal court. Thus far, federal courts have...
Yeah, that makes sense. I can't believe that didn't work.